Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I know it's a crazy, crazy conference with 10 things going on at any time, so I really appreciate you making the time. My name is Mei Chang. I am leading this workshop. I spent most of my career in Silicon Valley in the tech sector, studied as a software engineer, worked at companies like Google and Apple, and a bunch of startup companies. And then about 7 years ago, I decided to take a pivot with my own career and spend the second half of my career in the public and social sector. And so most recently, I was just the Chief Innovation Officer at USAID, left at the end of the Obama administration, and since then have been working on a book called Lean Impact, and that's what the workshop is going to be based on. The book's going to be coming out this fall, so keep an eye out for it. So how many of you have heard of the book Lean Startup? Is that something? Wow, a lot of people, great. So for those of you who haven't heard of it, Lean Startup is one of the books I think has done a good job capturing the best practices in innovation that have fueled progress in Silicon Valley and around the world, but mostly in the business sector. And so what I've been exploring over my career, kind of shifting over to the social sector, is looking at how these same kinds of techniques can be applied to helping us to accelerate our progress in social good in the same way that we've done in business. One thing I've learned is it's a lot harder for a number of reasons that we'll touch on during the course of today. So innovation is just harder in the social sector. We're working in intersection of market and policy failures. We have to deal with the dynamics of funding. We have to deal with vulnerable populations. There's a lot of things that make this much harder. But I do think it's very much possible, and the same kinds of techniques that have really been refined in Silicon Valley and in business can help us do much more good in the world. So today, you're going to get a little microcosm of this, and we're going to focus on the topic of scale. So first, I want to introduce, I have 4 fabulous people who could be leading this workshop in their own rights who are going to help me out, because this is mostly going to be an interactive workshop. They're going to be helping out as coaches for each of the tables. So first is Lana Stahl from MCC. She's going to be helping out these tables here. And then Jorge from UC Berkeley. He's going to be helping out back there. And then Tamara from DFID. I agree. Yes. And then Mariana Iskander from Harambee Youth Accelerator in South Africa. So they'll be coming around, and if you have any questions at any point during the exercises, just raise your hand. One of them or I will come by and try to help you out. So here's our agenda for today. The first thing I'll say is it's going to be very rushed. And I just want to set expectations. You're going to feel rushed. You're going to have to tame your inner perfectionist. What I want to do today is give you really a taster of sort of what the lean process looks like end to end. So we'll sort of take a light skim over the whole process. This is normally something I do as a 2-day workshop. They wouldn't let me run a 2-day workshop here, so we're doing it in 90 minutes. So one of the things we're going to do to keep on track is we're going to do 4 exercises, which are going to be timed. And at the end of each exercise, I'm going to steal a technique from Lana, which is I'm going to clap once. And so I'm going to say, if you hear me, clap once. And those of you who hear me, clap with me. And then for those of you who haven't, we're going to try and clap twice. So when you hear people clapping, stop. So we can kind of move on and get through the process. So why innovation in social good? So when I look back on the last 30 years, we've made slow but steady progress on things like clean water, electricity, sanitation. But at the same time, if you look at adoption of mobile phones, it's skyrocketed. Right? And so the question I've been asking is it possible, and shouldn't we be shooting for this kind of progress and scale in the things that we're doing for social good? And I think mobile phones have shown that it's possible, that when you have a business model, when you have a product that people really want and demand, that it is possible, even in the most remote areas, to have this kind of exponential growth. So one of my favorite quotes is from Edison, who said, "Genius is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration." And I would apply the same thing to innovation. I think a lot of times when we think about innovation, people focus on that 1% inspiration part, which is what I think of as the invention or the big idea. But what innovation is, in my mind, is really taking that germ of an idea, which might be brilliant, but making it practical and applying it to achieve true impact at scale in the world. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that goes into that. And that's essentially what the lean innovation process is about. So I want to try and encapsulate down 3 principles that I think are really essential to achieving social good. And 3 of the places where I think things are more difficult and where we go awry. So the first is to think big. This sounds simple, but I think one of the places where we fall down first is that we don't think big enough. We're not audacious enough when it comes to social good. We think about, oh, we're trying to do a 3 to 5 year program. What can we do with what we know today? Maybe we'll stretch a little, as opposed to looking at what is the need in the world out there, and how do we try to do something that is not just a stretch, but is audacious and may really cause us to completely rethink the way we do and change the systems in which we work. The second is, and this may sound contradictory, is to start small. At the same time that we often don't think big enough, we often grow too quickly. So we're not thinking that big, but we're expanding our programs to a lot more people before they've fully been tested, right? And so the key to innovation is not coming up with the best idea. What I found is the key to innovation is how fast you can drive your feedback loop. The faster that you're able to test and iterate and improve your solution, the more likely you're going to be able to land on something that really works. And the thing that makes a difference there is starting small. If you're trying to test something with 10,000 people, you're going to be much slower to test and iterate than you're trying to test with 10 people. And finally, relentlessly seek impact. There's a number of things that throw us off course here. It could be funders who are demanding us to do something different. It could be our own egos. It could be wanting to perpetuate our own organizations. It could be a particular technology we're excited about. And so, one of the things I think is essential is for us to stay laser focused on the impact we're trying to have. One of my favorite quotes comes from a colleague of mine at USAID who said, love the problem, not your solution. Right? We tend to fall in love with our solution and promote it and try to sell one and make our solution better, but we want to stay laser focused on the problem, because that's really what we're here to do. So today we're going to really focus on these first 2. So we're going to start out by thinking big, right? Again, be audacious. Think about what the size of the problem is that you're trying to solve in the world, as opposed to what you have today and what you think you can do with what you know. So the first goal, the first exercise is going to be just setting the groundwork. What's the goal and the problem you want to solve? This is going to be a very quick exercise, just so that we have the framework. So just to put it in perspective, the first 2 exercises will be 2 pretty quick exercises, just to establish the groundwork of what we're going to be working on for the rest of the workshop. And the next 2 workshop exercises, we're going to go a little deeper. So when we set a goal, it needs to be quantifiable. It sets the size of our aspiration. Astro Teller from Google X talks about the difference between setting a goal of making a car more fuel efficient by 10% versus by 10 times, right? We often will say, hey, we want to end poverty, we want to improve incomes, we want to improve health. But how audacious are you going to be? Are you being 10% better, or are you being 10 times better? Because the approach you're going to take is dramatically different. And Astro would argue that there's been so many people working on the 10% problem that in some ways it's easier to solve the 10x problem. It takes more risk, and it's something that I think we need to stretch to do more often. So the example I'm going to use throughout this workshop is one about off-grid electricity. And so just as an example of what a goal and a problem might look like, is my goal here is to have 80% of people in Africa have access to clean and reliable electricity, something around 50% today. So that's a top-level goal. It doesn't talk about how I'm going to do that. It doesn't reference a solution. But it's like how I want the world to be different. And then what's the problem? So there's multiple problems why people don't have access to electricity. One of the problems is that people in the rural areas don't have access to electricity that's affordable to them. Either they don't have access to the grid or the solar energy is too expensive. And so that's one of the problems that I might want to tackle in service to the goal. And so for the first exercise, what I want you to do is define your goal and the problem within that goal that you want to try to tackle, just for the purpose of this exercise. And so I'm going to ask everyone, for the most part, to do this on their own. It can be based on the organization you work with, an organization you're advising, an organization you're funding. What is a problem that you care, what's a goal you have and the problem you want to address. And so for those of you who don't have a specific problem you want to work on, help somebody who's sitting next to you who maybe does have one, and you can work together with them. But if you have something, I think you might get the most out of the workshop by working through something that's actively something that you care about and want to make progress on and sort of might want to think about in a different way. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes for this exercise, and I will clap when we're done with time. And again, raise your hands if you have any questions. Great.
Jump over now. There are some seats dotted.
Identify the problem is usually the metric that you'll say about your goal too. A lot of times so 80
Hear me clap twice. Hey, it worked. Great. I've heard lots of great discussions. If you're not quite nailed down, continue to think about it and refine this. One of the things I found is that this is one of the biggest failure points in innovation is not having a clear goal. So I know we don't have a lot of time to really grapple over this and refine it, but I think if you don't have something that's really crisp, it's worth going back and refining that, because with the clear goal, it helps you make later trade-offs. Otherwise, you can start spinning and going around in circles and kind of chasing after more tactical things. But we're going to move on because we have a very quick workshop and talk about a solution. So now that you have a goal and you have a problem that you want to tackle, you need a solution. So most often when we do this in the innovation world, we do something called an ideation session. It's the realm of human-centered design. What you normally want to do in coming up with an idea or a solution is to do things like engage all the different stakeholders that are involved, engage the communities that you're trying to work with, really bring in different perspectives from people who may be outside that domain but may have a different area of technical expertise or scientific knowledge or so forth. Because bringing different minds together who have different perspectives can often lead to solutions that you may not have ever thought of otherwise. Today, we don't have the luxury of doing that, so I'm just kind of giving you that context in the idealized world. So what we're going to do is do a much quicker exercise, which is really in 7 minutes, come up with 7 ideas of how you might solve the problem that you came up with. One of those might be what you're doing today, but I want to push you. And the reason that we say 7 is that forces, the first 3 or 4 are going to be pretty easy. There'll be things that are kind of in your mind you've been playing around with. But I want to push you a little bit to go beyond that. Think of something that might be really risky, that it may have a small chance of success, but has potential huge upside. Something that may sound a little crazy. All you're doing is writing in a box, so you're no commitment to it. So I want to encourage you guys to be creative here. And there's a separate worksheet on your tables that you can use for this. I'm not going to go through each of the examples I put up here, but I gave a few examples of how I would come up with the idea of, for my example, of people living without electricity in rural areas. And the one I finally came up here that I'm going to use is using a pay-as-you-go system for allowing customers to pay for their solar systems using mobile money, using a pay-as-you-go business model, which is something many of these off-grid companies have done. But I just gave an example of lots of different ideas that I might have played around with in order to get there. So I'm going to give you 8 minutes, take 1 minute each to come up with 7 ideas, and then the last minute I want you to pick one of them that you're going to use kind of going forward for the rest of the exercises. So again, you got 8 minutes, and raise your hand if you have any questions. Thank you. You hear me clap twice. Excellent. Well, some people were generating ideas in a frenzy. I was very impressed. So what we're going to do now is really turn to the meat of what I think the innovation process is about, which is starting small. And how do we, now that we have a big problem, a big goal, and an exciting new idea, how do we test it to see if it's going to work? And that requires starting small so that we can learn as quickly as possible. So
Can I just check in? Did we pick a single idea?
Oh yeah, did everyone pick an idea? So if you pick an idea and write it on your main worksheet, if you haven't done so yet.
As number 3.
Yeah, number 3 on your worksheet. That says idea. So now we're going to talk about how we're going to test this idea to see if it might work and refine the idea and improve it over time.
So,
Yes.
the idea is to pick one of the 7.
Yeah, pick one of the 7. And again, this is just for the purpose of the workshop. I know a lot of times people get hesitant to choose among their children. So pick one. You only need to be wed to that one for the next hour. Great. Okay, so we're going to talk about starting small now. And the first thing we're going to do is identify our assumptions. Again, we're focused on growth, so we're going to really focus on your assumptions for how is this thing going to scale. But the thing we want to ask ourselves, again, before we start deploying and hiring a bunch of people, building a bunch of infrastructure, starting to manufacture stuff, is to really test our assumptions to see, is this idea have legs? What are my assumptions behind it, and are they going to play out? So one of the kind of foundations of the Lean Impact book is this notion that in the world of social innovation, there's 3 fundamental pillars of making a successful social innovation. The first is value. This is customer value. Are you delivering something that the people you're delivering it for want, demand, will come back for, will tell all their friends to come back for, and all their family to come back for? Too often we give people things that we think are good for them, but not things that they want themselves. And that means that we're sort of trying to push a boulder up a hill. So what we want to do is figure out how can we make this something that people will actually want and desire and demand. The second is impact. The thing we do has to work. There's lots of things. Microfinance is a classic example that rolled it out to hundreds of millions of people and then started running some evaluations and discovered it has some positive benefits, but not the ones that were being claimed. So how can we test early on to make sure that the intervention we have, even if people want it, is actually going to work to solve the problem that we're trying to solve? So that's another set of assumptions to test. The third set of assumptions that are essential is around growth. So do you have an engine for growth that is not only going to help you grow linearly over time, so that for every dollar of you raise, you can reach another so many people, but actually be able to accelerate growth over time? Kevin Starr from the Lago Foundation defines scale as the slope of the curve. How do you get to exponential growth, where you have an engine that starts fueling itself and building momentum over time? Too often, again, I think we think too small, and we look at growth as sort of this brute force process of trying to raise some more money and can do a little bit more stuff. So we need an engine that will accelerate growth over time. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So how many have seen this happen in either their organization or other organizations, which is the sort of inverse hockey stick? So in Silicon Valley, you talk about hockey stick growth, where you start small, and then at some point the inflection point happens, and you accelerate, and you have millions or billions of users. In the social sector, I see the inverse happen more often, right? Which is you accelerate really fast in the beginning because you have a sexy idea, you have a great pitch, you come to the Skoll World Forum, you raise a bunch of money from funders, they get all excited, so you scale really quickly. And then you get to a point where you're reaching 100,000, maybe 1 million people, and there's just not enough donor dollars out there for you to scale any more quickly. Maybe you can continue to reach that many people a year, but you can't grow any faster at that point because you just run out of donor dollars. So that's what we're trying to avoid is this kind of phenomenon. And so one of the ways to avoid that is I think we focus a lot of times on the wrong metrics. We focus on metrics of success. When I ask most nonprofits what the metric of success is, the first thing they tell me is the number of people they're going to reach. The thing I hate most is when people say, how many people have you touched? It means nothing, right? because you can touch a lot of people and not have any impact on them. You can touch a lot of people and have had impact on them, but just because you were really good at raising money, but you may be like half as cost effective as the next thing out there. What really matters are what we call innovation metrics, which is for each unit, so for each person you reach, what are the things that happen? Like, are you able to reach that person more cost effectively than something else out there? Are you able to have a higher adoption rate, a higher conversion rate? Are you able to have greater impact on the outcomes? Those are the things that matter. And so when we talk about starting small and testing, what we want to do is test these unit level metrics that are the core drivers for how well your innovation works on a per person basis or on per intervention basis, rather than the aggregate number of people you touched. Because when you focus on the people you've touched, then you're just focusing on getting bigger, and you can get really caught up day to day in the tactical execution of just trying to get out to more and more people. And that just takes up all of your time and energy. And then you forget about really optimizing for the meaningful innovation metrics. So I want to run through 4 different sort of prototypical business models. There's many, many more than these, but just to get the juices flowing for the social sector. So of course, the easiest is if we can have a market-driven business model. So in my example of off-grid solar, it's too expensive for people to just buy a home solar system up front. It costs a few $100s. And so the innovation that several companies have come up with is this idea of people being able to pay using mobile money a few dollars every week to be able to pay off their solar system over time, sort of like a layaway plan, how we might pay for a mortgage for a house or for a car. But this allows people to afford solar systems. And when you can have a market-driven business model, you automatically have a driver for growth, especially assuming you're bringing in enough profits that you can plow that back into your business. Of course, that's not always possible, so there's a lot of other different scenarios. Another is a cross-subsidy model. So Aravind Hospital in India is the largest eye care facility in the world. Eye care hospital network in the world, and they use a cross-subsidy model. And there's 2 things that are key to them making this work. One is that they've driven down efficiency so that their cost per patient is dramatically lower than their competition, right? They've just really optimized their model to reduce their costs. At the same time, they cross-subsidize, so they bring in wealthier patients who get the same quality of care as poorer patients, but the wealthier patients pay enough more that they can, each one of them can pay for 3 to 4 poorer patients. And the only difference is not the quality of care, but the place that they stay in the ward. The higher paying patients get like an air-conditioned private room. The lower, the free patients stay in a shared ward, but they still get the same quality health care. Of course, another path to scale is replication or franchising, right? So it may not be that you have to get to all these people yourselves, but how can you, if you have a model that is so much better than what's out there, how do you get other people to adopt this model, to do it rather than whatever they're doing themselves that's less effective, or to take it up, either by replicating what you're doing or franchising out what you're doing, so you have multiple different flowers blooming around the world. And microfinance is a great success story from that standpoint in terms of spreading around the world. And of course, the 4th model is government, right? I think this is a path that we too often don't really pursue. But when it comes to basic services like health and education, the government is the biggest spender and the biggest provider. And so where we can influence how the government spends their money to do so more effectively and to take on solutions that are better, we can get dramatically better results. So I'm going to now ask you to do another exercise, which is to identify your assumptions. And specifically, normally I have people look at the value, impact, and growth assumptions. We're going to focus on growth today. And so in my, I'm going to break this out in 2 categories of assumptions and pick one for each. Again, Kevin Starr from Mulago talks about who's the payer at scale and who's the doer at scale. Because 2 things have to happen for you to get to scale. Someone has to pay for all these. It could be the person themselves, it could be cross-subsidized, it could be the government, and somebody has to actually do the work, and that could be yourself, or it could be other people replicating, it could be the government doing it. So for this exercise, think about who is going to be, who's going to pay when you get to scale, and who is going to do when you get to scale, and what are the assumptions behind that? So my assumption here is that families will actually be willing to buy a home solar system if they have to pay $5 a week for 2 years, right? So that's something I might need to test to see if people are willing to do that. Who will do? I sort of have a mixed model here where I'm saying I'm going to build and manufacture these things because there's economies of scale for me to like build and manufacture masses of these home solar systems. But I don't want to, and I don't think I can, grow my organization fast enough to span all of Africa. So I'm going to franchise out this model and actually get different organizations across Africa to like start their own businesses and sell these home solar systems I can provide them. That's one potential model. So think about and so my assumption here is that those franchisees are going to be able to be as successful as I am. Because if my model is incredibly complex, they may not be able to replicate. They may not be able to have the same kind of results that I'm able to show myself. So that's another assumption to test. So think about what your model for scale might be. And what's your riskiest assumption? What's the thing that is most likely to go wrong in terms of both who's going to pay for it, are they going to pay for it and keep paying for it, and who's going to actually do it at scale and actually do the work to get this out to people? And so what I'm going to ask you to do is just spend 5 minutes on your own coming up with this, and then pair up with 2 or 3 people and share what you came up with each other, and then play devil's advocate, like challenge each other about, is there something even riskier you can think of that you think might go wrong in the model that they have, okay? So 5 minutes first to kind of work on your own, and then work in groups of 2 or 3 to kind of share with each other and challenge each other on the assumptions.
5 minutes total?
No, 5 minutes to start with, and then 10 minutes with 50 minutes total, yes. Thanks for the clarification. Okay? Yes. Okay, everyone, if you can hear me, clap once. Can you hear me, clap twice? Thank you. Great work, people. So I love all the energy in the room. One thing I'll note is that I noticed in talking to some folks that when people were looking at their assumptions, they're still looking at how do we raise enough money to get to the 1% or 10% of the size of the problem, right? So what I really want to encourage you guys to do is to think about stretching, to look at if the size of the need is 1 billion people in poverty in the world, or some number of millions of people. A lot of times it's easy for us to look at grant money or other types of funding that will get us part of the way there, but again, we peter out. So stretch yourselves to think about, like, if I really want to solve the whole problem, reach the ultimate size of the need out there, what are other streams that are more sustainable that can really accelerate my growth to get there? Okay, so we went through assumptions. The next thing we're going to do is talk about experiments. So this is the fun part. So we've identified some assumptions of who's going to pay for this, who's going to do this, and so now it's how do we test to see if those assumptions are true or not? Again, there's a temptation in the social sector for us to scale too quickly. So we try to start rolling things out. We get excited that people are using whatever we're doing, and we get out to more and more and more people, and soon we're at 10,000 people, and we haven't actually verified our assumptions. So one of the sort of mottos of Lean Startup is to get out of the building. And the question I want to challenge you is to say, if you had to do something tomorrow with just one person, maybe 10 people, what could you do that would help you learn something about your assumption? Not necessarily like validate it to 100% certainty for all time, but learn the next increment of information that will help you refine your solution and refine your approach before you get to the next increment. So the way we test assumptions in the Lean Startup world is called MVP, or minimum viable product. And the idea is to build like a prototype or a proxy for the product that you want, as simple and small as possible, that you can start getting real life feedback on it. right? So this could, in this example here, you might have you have a little skateboard, and you can get a sense of like how people want to move from place to place. You get some feedback, then you get a more and more sophisticated vehicle over time. And so the idea is like, what's that simple thing? In the beginning of the slide, I had the airplane, and then the paper airplane was the minimum viable product. What is the simplest thing that you could do that gives people a sense? And I'll run through some examples of what that might look like. So Copia is a social enterprise in Africa that is a consumer goods distribution company. And they're sort of like trying to be the Amazon in rural Africa, where they give people a catalog of a wide range of consumer goods. For people who often have very limited selection because they live far from the city, now they have access to a lot more goods. But will they actually buy goods from a catalog? Will they want these goods? Will they pay for them? So one way that you might approach that is you could hire a whole sales force, you could stock a warehouse, you could select what goods you think they're going to want, and then you could go, and you might find out that you've completely mistargeted. So what they did instead for their MVP is they basically took pictures of products at the local market in the city and pasted together a paper catalog, went out and gave it to some kiosk owners and to see if people would buy. And if people bought the product, they would basically go to the market and buy it at retail off the shelf and bring it over to them the next day, right? So it was, sort of very manual and time intensive, but it gave them a sense of the market of what products people are going to want or not want before they started stocking their own warehouses or manufacturing their own products. Another example is PATH, which is a global health nonprofit, wanted to look at what kind of water filters would people want to get cleaner water, right? So a big issue in developing countries is people don't have access to clean water. There's various different attempts to get people water filters. And so they tried out two different versions of this water filter. One was the simplest, cheapest version, which is often what we think people want, right? Is, people are poor, they're going to want the least expensive thing that works. And they had another nicer model that had a nicer design, but that cost twice as much. And so they put them in the store, see what people would buy, and they were surprised that 3 times as many people bought the nicer version. And the reason was that people were embarrassed to have something that looked like a garbage bucket sitting in the middle of their home. And so there's just a couple examples of the kinds of assumptions that we may not anticipate in each of our respective spaces that you can only tell by seeing what people do. And the critical thing about a minimum viable product is you want to measure behavior, like what people do, not what people say. So if you ask people, would you like A or B or whatever, the answers, and there's a bunch of research out there to show this, the answers are really not correlated with what they're actually going to do. So what you want to do as much as possible is to create the real world condition. Again, even if you're sort of putting together a masking tape or whatever, you want to create the real world condition to see how people will respond in the real world. So in my example of pay-as-you-go solar, if I want to know, are people going to pay for this? One way I could do is I could actually build the technology to take the mobile payments, to meter the home solar system and turn it off if people don't pay, manufacture that, then distribute it and see if people are going to use it. That's really expensive. The other way, which a company called Off-Grid Solar did, was basically go around, try to sell these solar systems, and have a person physically come collect money every week. Now, that's not going to scale over time, but you can test out that assumption of whether people will pay over time by just sending a person around to collect the money. Then you can test other assumptions later, like will they pay using mobile money? That's another thing that you could test using a different mechanism, right? And so the idea is to break down your assumptions and your problems and look at what are the ways that you could test. So of the two assumptions that you came up with, which is who is going to pay for this at scale and who is going to do this at scale, think about what is this, pick one of those, and think about if you had to tomorrow go out and test that, what could you do to learn a little bit more about whether people would pay that you're expecting to pay, if they're going to pay as much as you expect them to pay, or if people who are going to do are going to be able to do as well as you expect them to do. Okay, and we're going to take 10 minutes for the next exercise. Again, take a few minutes on your own to think about what your experiment might be, and then talk again in your kind of small groups of 2 or 3 people to give each other feedback about the experiment. once. You hear me clap twice. Should we need 3 times? Okay. Well, that was a lot of fun. It looked like people came up with some great ideas. So I want to just take the last 10 minutes we have just so we can share as a group. And what I'm really interested is, I only got to talk to a few people, so I'd love to hear, what did you learn? Did you guys have any new insights either about the process or about the particular thing that you're working on? Anything that surprised you or any questions? So I just want to leave the floor open for anyone who'd like to share or have a question. Yeah. Oh, sorry. You're next. And I think we have mics somewhere.
I think the difficulty in getting hard targets in this world is one of the things that I think was reinforced. And then I think the other thing is where you have multiple binding constraints on a systemic issue, just how you adapt the methodology for that would be a question.
Uh-huh. Was that a question for me? Or I think can you be more specific about the multiple binding constraints, like, as an example?
Multiple problems for your goal. You know how you went to step.
So that if no one problem would unlock the goal,
I
but
see.
there's multiple things that must be unlocked before that objective could be achieved.
I see. So how do you test for multiple problems having to be solved in order for the goal to be achieved?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. So it's a little hard to answer that in the abstract. We can talk a little bit more about that offline. But part of it is, so it may mean running multiple experiments, right? So the idea is not you run an experiment, you've answered all your questions. The idea is to figure out how you can run experiments as quickly as possible and expecting to run many of them. So if you have, say, 3 problems that need to be solved before your goal would be reached, you can run experiments independently to test for each of those 3 to see if you have a way to solve each of the 3, and then run an experiment with them combined to see if when you combine them, they still work, right, in order to then roll up to the goal. It's sort of a simplified answer, but happy to talk more in detail about your specific scenario.
Great, thanks so much. And just thanks for the workshop, it's brilliant.
Thank you. Question over here?
Hello,
Hey.
I'm Carrie Hessler-Rabbit. Hi, Ann May. So I run a nonprofit organization called PCI that works along the border, the southern border in the United States, and we deliver health services. It's one of many things we do. So one of the things that we've been concerned about is a large number of girls who drop out of school, and we think it's because of pregnancy. But the other thing I just want to say is Mariama is awesome, and she has been trained by you, and she's so fantastic. So I just want to say that because she really helped me with this. So my issue, the goal that I was trying to achieve was that adolescent girls finish high school and are then able to pursue college or a job. And the problem that I identified is early dropout of high school because of pregnancy. And I should also say that this is not something I'm currently working on. This is sort of very aspirational. So I'm really, really starting at the beginning. So my idea, which was concocted really just here on the spot, was that
I love it.
we would have an online program that would support these girls so that they could stay at home and take care of their children, but also pursue their degree. And so I was so helped by Mariana, who really helped me see the process that I needed to come to, and that in fact maybe my MVP, my minimum viable program was really identifying very clearly through a question and answer process the problem that we needed to solve. Was it actually the pregnancy that was keeping them from school, or was it something else? You know, I really needed some help in figuring out what questions to ask so that I could actually get to the solution. Now, I, in my head, designed an online GED program, but in talking to Mariana and Hilde, what we really came upon was the fact that the research that I needed to do was all about really identifying the problem so I could fall in love with the problem, not the solution.
That's great.
So I just wanted to say what a useful exercise this was, and anyway, I really loved it, and I'm grateful to Mariana.
Thank you for sharing. That's a great example. Anybody else want to share? Yes.
Yeah, so I have a question. So I work in a university and we use lean methodology with students to foster the creation of ideas coming from the problem. And one of the issues we usually face is how to take the students from the problem to the solution, but thinking the solution as something scalable. Because many times, and especially in social entrepreneurship, when you talk about working with the community, it suddenly seems like scaling. It's counter. They don't match.
Yep.
When you work with the community, it's very hard to scale because then it's a manual work, and then how you can do that on scale.
Yep.
So how do you have any tools or advice or anything that you have learned through the years to work in this process from going from the problem to the solution, but the solution being something that can be scalable and still maintain the community work that it's implied in social entrepreneurship?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think Carrie's example also gets at some of the challenges around innovation in the social sector that are just harder than business, right? And so, I think Carrie's example gets to, like, one of the challenges is funding, right? That it's much harder for us to get flexible funding to be able to explore these things, or funding pushes us to actually implement before we actually have explored the problem sufficiently. To your question, I think that there's multiple paths to scale, right? And there's no one easy answer. I think the first important step is to even ask the question. So a lot of times we're like, there's a problem, we're just going to solve the problem right in front of us. We're going to take something that's tractable and try to tackle that. And we don't even think about the path to scale, right? So the first thing I would say is start out by asking that question from the beginning. Like, if we figure out something that works, how could we potentially get this to more people? So we don't design something that is so expensive that you couldn't ever scale it, right? That it's only ever going to be very bespoke, because the amount of money we need to spend per person, if we have to design a whole new program and hire a whole new staff for each community to have an intervention, is incredibly expensive. We're not going to reach as many people as we want. So first is just ask the question. And then the second is, like, really just get creative. Bring in some people from the business school to help with the different potential business models. Bring in some people from government. Bring in people with different perspectives to look at the different ways to scale. For something that has to be a very intensive community-based intervention, the path to scale may not be a market-driven business model, maybe a replication model. So if you come up with a best practice that whatever the intervention, you're able to achieve twice the results for the money that the next community is, like, then you might want to teach them how to do that, right? So that might be your path to scale. Yeah. I think a mic behind you.
Thank you. So I'm in EdTech, which is funny because Alison from Healing Hands of Hope is in Fistula. I have nothing there. But the thing that's the strangest thing. So I guess one of the things I'll add to what you've said is, because I'm from such a different school of thought, the conversation we had when she started talking about it, I was like, I am not going to add any value to your life. But the more we've talked about it, we've actually come up with a whole solution that works for her.
That's
so
great.
It's really strange. She's at the point of trying to get awareness to this.
So the people who are too close to the problem often can't see beyond that. Yeah.
That's something you've just taught me that I didn't know about. But if everybody picks out their phones, this is a very interactive workshop. So everyone pull out your phone. Everybody pull out your phone. Every single person pull out your phone. Go to your dial pad. Is everyone on your dial pad? Yeah? Dial pad, like where you dial your friends. Okay, so do this. Do *#06#. If you see a massive 16-digit number, put your phone up. Put your phone up if you done. Put your phone up if you see a massive 16-digit number, yeah? That's like what, half the room? Around half the room? So it's *#06#. So you all have numbers. That is that's called the IMEI number. Yeah? That's a unique identifier for your device. There's no other number on the planet that has that number. The *#06#. That thing is called a USSD. That's what made mobile phones in Kenya explode. Because using that USSD function, now if I owned the USSD function, I'd probably have *123#. I can lead you to a route that allows you to get information. if you're seeing where this is going. So Alison and I were like, we can create a USSD number, then create a menu, and because the women are not literate, instead of the menu being text, it could be press a number to listen to in your own dialect about A, B. There's an organization called Farmerline. That's also a fellow like I am here, and they've done that with farmers. And you star 123 hash, and which language would you like? Would you like it in Xhosa? And so you pick the number. What would you like to hear about? Bananas, oranges. Then you pick a number. Would you like to hear about bananas which are ripening or not? And it's such an outside solution because we spoke and we have nothing to do with each other. So to your point, get people who are outside. Literally, my point is get people who are outside your space to look at your problem. They will see it in such a different perspective. It may give you a solution you never knew existed.
That's great. Thank you. So just one more. Yes.
I'm Fleur. I run a foundation in Amsterdam called Refugee Company. And my mission was in 10 years to have 20,000 people out of welfare for at least 2 years with a refugee background. And I completely relate to the last speaker because I have someone in a completely different field than I am. So we were discussing, okay, so in Nigeria you give people a piece of land. So we were discussing the same solution for Holland, but we don't have pieces of land. So I'm really inspired by you because you just in a few sketches you come up with a very beautiful solution. So in the Netherlands, it costs about €28,000 to give shelter to one refugee for a year, and then legal support, medical support, and I think basically we pay for the management of the shelters. And we decided that we come up with a solution to combine a shelter with a more entrepreneurial active space where we say to the government we can do it for half of the costs, and then not let people don't let lives being on hold in the shelters, but have people active in communities. And we also decided not to build shelters of 500 people, but of 10 people. So we're trying to find a lot of villages who want to give shelter to like very, very tiny shelters. Well, this is how far we came. So.
Thank you. Excellent. So thank you all for coming and for your time. I know it's a busy conference. I'd be grateful if you could fill out the survey form on I think should be little square sheets of paper in the middle, whether you liked or didn't like the workshop. It'd be fantastic. And I just want to thank you all for coming, and thank you, Mariana, Jorge, Lana, and Tamara.